webinar, which is a community energy webinar related to the experience from a successful community project that has now successfully bid in the RESS 1 auction. Okay, so my name is Mel Gavin. I work for IT Sligo in the Contract Research Unit. We're an external engagement function of IT Sligo. I'm joined by my colleague Paul McNamara, who's currently just in the background, making sure everything is working okay. And we're very thankful today to have a member of the Claremorris and Western Energy District Co-op. This is JP Prendergast, and he is the main speaker today. So he's going to tell us about their experience in getting to the stage they're at, and also perhaps maybe elaborate on some future plans they have, because they're not just stopping with this project. Okay, so we're at 3 minutes past 11. So again, just a reminder to everyone to please keep your mic muted. It's up to you whether your camera is on or off. It'd be best if it's off. Probably we are recording this, and it will be made public. And in relation to questions, because there's so many people, it's not practical for us to have an open mic question session. So if you have a question and you use the chat function in Microsoft Teams, my colleague Paul will be collating those, and we'll select some of the questions that haven't been answered at the end. Okay. So without further ado, JP, you just want to say hello?
Yeah, hello, Mel. Thank you. Thanks for having us on the call.
No, thank you, really. So we're talking today about the community solar farm that Claremorris and Western Energy Co-op, or Energy District Co-op, have successfully got through the RESS 1 auction. So just before we get into the RESS 1 details, and perhaps a lot of the background as to where you are, could you just tell us a little bit about this particular solar farm project as a generator, in terms of the megawatts, the type of generation we can expect from it, the site itself, and maybe the solar area and the grid connection, things like that.
Sure. So firstly, hello to everyone. It's it's nice to see we started 3 years ago, or 4 years ago, as a small co-op with the help of Temple Dairy and John Fogarty, whereby we were just two groups looking at solar. To have such an audience today looking at the same thing, it shows the success of the potentially RESS 1 and SAI and what's been done over the last 2 years, and it's great to see. Our project is in Claremorris town. It's a unique one whereby we initially had taken on the role of looking to set up an SEC for energy, renewable energy generation. We weren't involved in retrofitting. We were solely looking to do energy generation. For us, it was a means by which we could empower our community to generate a revenue over 15, 20 years to allow us to invest in other projects within our town. And we felt this was a great opportunity. And at the time, after speaking to the infamous John Fogarty down there in Temple Dairy, he gave us the confidence, I think, to go as a small group to look at this as an option for Claremorris. The site is, as in a farming term, mirroring the town or beside the town. It's about a 25-acre site. It's a unique one because it was our old dump. It was the dump in Claremorris for years, in 1940s, 50s onwards. It was used as the general disposal site in Claremorris town. And so for so long where we had probably dumped all the waste into this location, it was nice to look at this as potentially turning around to be a renewable energy project. And so what we did was we approached Mayo County Council with the idea that we would turn it into a solar park or a solar farm. And so we would regenerate or generate a renewable energy from it. The site will probably generate about 4.2 plus megawatts. It is probably, it has Mayo County Council with a local farmer included, because we need to extend a small bit on the space that we needed. We started the process about maybe 4 years ago, maybe less than 4 years ago, trying to get what we call the connection to grid under ACP 1 at the time, enduring connection policy. And so we'd have put our applications into the regulator to get a connection to grid offer. What we found then in the last probably period of time, because there was such a surplus amount of applications, the regulator decided that they would stop that process, and they would then introduce a new means by which we would get an offer for connection to grid subject to having a planning permission. So the first thing we had to do was go out and get planning applications pulled together. This one again is different because we have two sites in Claremorris. We actually applied for two. We applied for one which was a planning application process, but the one we're talking about today was a Part 8 planning application, whereby we worked with Mayo County Council in putting through a planning application with the council to give us this size solar park. At this stage, I have to say, as I'm sitting here representing Claremorris, there's 7 in our group, and each one of those members, I believe, did a lot more work than I did. And key people I'll always mention would be Pat Neary and Noel Kilroy, Stella Huan and Richard, including Phelim and Ray. We sat around the table after meeting John Fogarty, and we decided that we would go for this. We had no idea where we were going. We had no idea. In fact, the biggest issue we had was educating people what was solar generation, and how this would work for communities. Our goal was to be 100% community owned. And the reason why we want to be 100% community owned is that we were empowered that we would have an ownership on the project for the profits that we would generate from the site that would go into our community, but also that we had control within reason of the site itself. So our first goals were become community owned, generate an income for our community that could involve reinvesting in projects, and at the same time be able to, I suppose in this case with this site, regenerate a site that was deemed useless as a brownfield site. With Mayo County Council, because it's a part planning application, Part 8, the council itself does the planning application. So what we did was we would have submitted the drawings and submitted the application. We would have got the consultants on board with the council. And then what we do is we would engage, I think we engaged about maybe 250 people within the town to explain what this project was about and how we were doing it. And from there, then we put our planning application together. It was then on display within our town, within actually not only just the town, but actually in the county. And there we took questions and answers. People would ask what this was about, what we're trying to do. We got the planning eventually, just probably this year, beginning of this year. And that allowed us then to go and submit for we had at this stage got our connection to grid offer. So we were ready at RESS 1 to go in with our planning application and our connection offer to go for the auction itself. And so this now lies where Claremorris has got its first site. I'm going to refer a small bit to the other site because the other site we've gone through planning ourselves. So we would have done the planning application for the second site that we have in the town ourselves. This was interesting because the cost to us was up on 25,000 plus to get this pulled together. As a community, we had to, as a group of 7 individuals actually, we had to go to our local credit union, raise the 20,000, 25,000. We had to give personal guarantees to 25,000. We had no guarantee will we get our planning permission, and we certainly had no guarantee that it would be successful in any means or form. And the reason I mention this is because what's been structured for RESS 2 and what's happening now with SAI is that hardship that maybe we had to go through at the beginning isn't going to be as difficult for communities going forward for the next application. I think because we have the SEC mentoring scheme, which was imperative to us at the time because it gave us advice and direction, you now have a RESS mentor as well who will help you through that whole auction process. So what's being put in place, I think, believe it now, is a mechanism which will support those communities to develop those applications. Back to our story anyways, we raised the money from the credit union. We went in for that site at the same time we went in for the council site. We obtained the planning permission for the council site area this year with the RES. We also obtained planning at the same time for our other site. We entered the first site for RES, which was the auction, which was just a mind-boggling experience because we had no knowledge whatsoever what we were doing. It was a process by the regulator had set up information gathering, so you'd have to submit your planning, your connection to grid, at the same time your leases, which were imperative to the project, and then also what you were going to submit as the price per kilowatt on that site. So this is kind of background to the project itself. The biggest issues that we probably would have initially entailed was that we would have had Opportunities to jump at individuals coming into us at the early stages saying that they would get the planning for us at probably a cost. And because the group that we have were quite careful in how we approached this, we went to our local engineer and we looked at the cost of getting this planning ourselves, and we found that it was actually less than what the external groups are coming in at. So my first learning experience for me was that we as a community were capable of doing this, as every community is. And what we did find out is by taking it a gentle one step at a time, we were able to get better value for money in what we did. But the biggest thing for us, because of our relationship with Temple Dairy, we as a community, working with a community, we were capable of working the problem through and owning 100% of the project itself, which for us, we feel is imperative for communities going forward. We believe that everyone should be empowered to do that, and certainly from the experience we've had with these two projects, it is absolutely a process that can be done. And I was asked one day to give an example why I meant that, and the simple reason was, if I'm to build my home and under this scheme you have two options: you have 100% ownership by community, or you've got this what we call developer come community partnership going in, where a developer takes 49% of your project and they own, and we as a community would own 51%. What I was trying to explain was, if we build a house and if I own 51% of my house, but yet some stranger owns 49%, who I don't know will own it again in 2 or 3 years' time, you never have the full benefit of this community project. So it was one of the learning lessons for us was, even though it was more difficult to go through the process as a full 100% community-owned project, to us now we're going to get the benefits of that as being the 100% owner of that project. One of the things we had to do, ironically, at the same time, and pardon me if I keep jumping, but guide me along here, Mel. What we did was, with Temple Dairy, we found very quickly that we needed a vehicle to support our application. And so what we wanted to do was, we wanted to try and empower the community itself, the community within the community. So what we wanted to do was allow community not only to generate its own power, but we wanted the community to sell its own power. And in doing so, we set up a group called Community Power. And Community Power was probably key to the credibility of our application, because it was seen as a community-owned organisation that would compete on the open market with the likes of Electricity or GasNet or Bord Gáis, but the profits from that organisation would go back into that community. So from our point of view, what we're trying to do with this project on this RESS 1 was, not only do we do the RESS as the application for the generation, so the revenue we get from that, we've now been able to set up a mechanism where the community can now buy and sell its own power within that community and keep the profit of selling that power within that community. And I'll give you a good example. My mother, she's the best in the world, right? But she's with the IFA, right? She's got IFA Telecom. She thinks it's brilliant. She is loyal to the IFA, but the IFA takes the revenue from what she gets from that. When I explained to her what Community Power did, that the money that she was paying for the buying of that power went back into her community, after about 3 or 4 days of 20 questions, she then understood the value of what community was. So for this RESS application, when we submitted our application and we had the ability for that community to sell this power within the community and take that profit, it brought another level of credibility. And it was something that we had to set up in parallel to support the community 100% owned type project. So that's the kind of a broad story of what this project was about. Going back into RESS 1, Mel, sorry, and it's this application, I'm sorry about this, but this application, when we got our planning permission and when we got our plan permission and we got our connection to grid, we were as a community analysed by the applicants themselves, the group taking the applicants, to see that we were 100% community. So it was often important to show that we had the credentials of not just being community, but that the supports around us were also community. And that, I think, was a massive support to us in being successful in this RESS 1 application.
Okay.
So focus me a bit, Mil. So focus me now a small bit.
You've covered a lot of ground there, and I think you've tried to. I could probably just turn things off now, because you've answered probably every question I have, but I'd like to maybe go back and focus on a few points there. The last point one of the last points you made is in relation to the partnership with Community Power, and how you have a generator, then also an energy seller as well. Now, that I understand that structure, and it's a really nice structure. But I suppose for some of the people here who are maybe just at a concept stage or at an early stage, the seller bit is not necessary to develop your community energy generator.
Yeah.
So we might elaborate that on in a bit more. But one of the areas that we're often asked is the community ownership model, or the co-op model that you have.
Yes.
So if you could talk a bit about that, because I'd imagine that Cormac Walsh and the guys at Energy Cooperatives would have been instrumental in guiding you in that.
Yeah, Cormac and Louis were great that time. What we did was we set up a co-op. There was originally 7 of us actually involved in the co-op. We set up a co-op from the point of view is that there's pros and cons to the whole situation of a co-op. As a co-op, you are audited, your accounts are audited every year. So when we used to submit our accounts, you're audited. But what it did was it absolutely validated any expenses or costs as a group that you had community-wise as your co-op group. What we did was we pulled in 7 members. On the first round, of the 7 members, we then joined this co-op through ICOS. So ICOS allowed us to set that up. And from there, then what we did is we extended that from 20 to 40 to 50 now to the 100 members that we have, up to potentially the 150 now we have with the solar park. The reason we did a co-op was we needed a legal entity, but also we wanted to follow the similar model of years ago of co-ops being more community. There's a perception to co-ops, Mel. When you say a co-op to a local guy, local individual, local person, they do see that as a community. They see it as a gathering of people together in a legal entity rather than setting up a company, which, from a point of view, you may have to do as part of structures. But we wanted to embrace the community ownership, and the co-op gave us that, ICOS. And so we set that up, structurally we set it up that way, to cover whatever structure, whatever decisions we had to make as we moved along the path. So that was the setup of the co-op itself.
Yeah, as you said, the co-ops themselves, because the co-op structure is quite well understood in Ireland through other mechanisms, through farming co-ops, through group water scheme co-ops. Yeah. So it feels like a community organisation. You can form a company, as far as I'm concerned, as long as the principles are.
Yeah, and you may have to do that. In this case, we did for the RESS. We had to set up a company, so it was owned by the co-op. So one of the first things I'd be advising communities would be to take advice from the SEC mentor in understanding the structures for these applications, and this is really for tax purposes, but also for ownership purposes as well. So what we call it's a technical term called parent-child. So the overall owner is the co-op, and then they own that company underneath it. So from a taxation point of view, and also from a point of view reinvestment, which is important to us because we'd have a number of projects we want to reinvest into, it allows that vehicle to do that for us. So as your concept grows to a stage of generating an income, what you want to do as a community is reinvest that income, to the best of your ability without paying the maximum amount of tax on that income. So it's very important with the SEC mentoring that we have, and we had, that we had Cormac at the beginning was fantastic, and now Orla and yourselves, we've been able to optimize what we can get from our generation to reinvest in our communities, and those legal structures are going to be often important for that reason. So you'll see as you grow that whole structure might change as an ownership, but it's always 100% owned by that community, the co-op itself.
Yeah, so that's an important point, I think, for everyone listening. Probably the Energy Cooperatives Ireland are a really good starting point if you want guidance and advice on this. The other question we'd often be asked in relation to, at what point do you need to have that co-op, that organisation formalised? So as you're going through, do you need it for the planning? If you don't have it for planning, you would apply as someone else. Can you transfer planning?
We need it pretty quickly, because for a number of reasons. Before you go for planning, the landowner has to consent that they're allowing you to go for planning on that site. So to do so, what we had put in place was an agreement to lease, and that agreement to lease was subject to our connection and to our RESS and being successful with the planning application. They would enter into a lease agreement for 20-25 years. but to do that you needed a legal entity. So it wasn't just an individual. And what happens is, and this is where I suppose SECs start to believe in themselves. When you get a lease, you've an asset. You've an asset there. You own this as a community group. So you now have a mechanism to negotiate. So that lease is awful important, and for that you need that legal structure. Also, from the point of view that when we went to the credit union for the planning application, we had to be a legal structure as well. So we had to be a legal entity with a purpose. Like, why were we giving you the money? Because what we found with the credit union was they didn't understand what solar parks were about. They didn't understand what a RESS was about. And so, even though in our case, Pat Neary, went in fairness to him, numerous times and sat there patiently to explain this, they eventually got the idea. We still had to be a legal entity. So, and also from the point of view of expenditure, what we spent on, certain expenses, you do need that for returns. So I would be, after your feasibility stage, knowing that this is a good potential, I would certainly be looking at a structure. And the other reason actually is because we have 2 or 3 other projects we want to do. We have a district heating type project that we want to invest in. So we're here for the long term. So we want to be absolutely focused that, this was real from day one, and we weren't prolonging the step, as the process went along.
Okay, well, I think that's good advice then from your experience, that it's good to get that organisation formalised as early as possible in the process. The other point you made there, which is something I'd like to just reiterate, and something we've advised a number of communities that have a feasibility study around a community-owned generation and that have identified sites, but they haven't gone the step of getting agreement with those landowners and getting consent with those landowners. And as you said, that's the point where you then have a project that you can take forward. When you have feasibility and you don't have the land, you don't have where that energy is going to be generated, anyone can get that project. So to keep it for the community, it's best if you get that agreement with the landowners and get them as part of the project as quickly as possible.
Well, what we did was we made them members of the co-op. So the 2 landowners became members of the co-op. So they saw everything for what it was. Sometimes there's an element of mistrust with communities as say, what are these 10 or 20 individuals trying to do? And the only way of doing that is being open and honest about it. And so we invited them as members of the co-op. And in doing so, they knew exactly what our agenda was and what we were trying to do. And including Mayo County Council. I mean, indirectly became associate members of the co-op. So I think it's important from a point of view from any community, is one of the hurdles you're going to have to get over is the planning application. You're going to have to go out there and tell people we're going to put on 20 acres of land a load of solar panels, and these solar panels are going to be here for a long time, and it's going to generate money for the community. So you're going to have to be very open on what you're doing and how you're doing it. So what we did was we asked them to be members, and by that way we'd nothing to hide, and it proved it was a good step for us. It was easier to convince them to come on board. In fact, I would nearly be suggesting that you're looking to do feasibilities that you have some agreement already from that landowner. I would be reluctant to go out looking at lands and say, this is a feasible 3 or 4 sites. I'd be careful because, again, you do all the work. If you've no legal or attachment to that feasibility study location, there's nothing to say that farmer may change his mind, or a third party may come in and say they might take an ownership of it. So I certainly would be careful in doing your feasibilities to have some, at least, discussions with the landowner to see that they are interested in proceeding with you on this and making sure that it's in the interest of both for them and for the community project.
I suppose it's a key part of the term feasibility that the land is available to you.
Yeah, it is.
That perhaps the owner of the land doesn't have different plans, or maybe a renewable energy skeptic. Like, who knows?
Well, and this is the thing, and I'm going to say this openly. Don't be under any illusion that some developer will come in behind you and take your work and take the project. And I'm saying this openly because this happens. In this RESS pot, we have 1% of it for community. It's just 1%. 99% of that pot belongs to developers. And for me personally, I think the developers should stay in that 99% pot. They've got the majority of it is. And be under no illusion that there will be individuals out there who may take that work that you do, and a farmer may very quickly take that work and go to a developer, and he might come up with his own solution. So, at the same time, I wouldn't be naive in saying that community that the spirit of community is 100% there, you really have to be careful as an organization and treat this as a business, to be honest, because if you don't, you could leave yourself open to problems down the road. And that's certainly something I would emphasize on.
Yeah, and I think maybe on another occasion we might touch on it today is some of the advice around communities working with developers, because there has to be a huge amount of trust. There has to be a very open relationship for that to work, if it's going to work. And I can tell that your own philosophy in your own group was, this is ours, this is 100% community. But as you said, there in the policy there's space for this partnership of community and developers. So I think at some stage, like I think SAI and through ourselves, we need to advise the communities as to how they manage that, how they would protect themselves in those scenarios.
I think Mel, I go a step further. I would be urging the SECs that this process is not, you're not going to go through the same process we did. The unknowns that we had was just huge. And to quite honest with you, the hand-holding experience we had with Temple Dairy and I suppose, knowing that there was a community out there to help us and support us at the same time, that it was a process by which we had to go through. It's not going to be the same this time. And I think SAI are a fantastic position, and they are, you can see, structuring things to allow communities to take that ownership. But I would say this openly, that I would be a supporter of communities being 100% owned. And I think at the end of the day, bringing a developer in, there's an agenda in my eyes. And for that, it is not difficult to be 100% owned, and I think it can be done. Don't jump at the first opportunity to take a pot of money that at the end of the day you will turn around in 5 years' time when you pass that park and go, why did we give that to him? I would say use the resources that are there. Use the guys like yourselves who are massive. Use the resources in the RESS Mentor, which is massive. Use the support of SAI, who are there for the good of the communities, which is massive, and empower those people. Because at the end of the day, there isn't a week that goes by I don't get a phone call. When I'm quite happy, and I know as much as I've been on the road, that John Fogarty has been on that road every day over a period of time supporting communities. And we as a group of communities together can do this, and we have no issue. With no agenda to make sure that those communities can be 100% empowered. And I certainly would hope that the developer-led projects would be considered to be left in the developer-led pot.
Yeah, well, I think what you've just said there is a strong message, and it's something you mentioned earlier on, that the guys in Temple Dairy, and we all mentioned John Fogarty, and John's supported by a great team down there, and there's a lot of people behind that. And what they've done. But the reason why a community may be wooed, let's say, by a private developer now would be because that private developer has some capacity to do a project. But now we have community projects who've been through the process. So the guys in Temple Dairy, now yourselves and a few others, Barnadera got through, again, in partnership with Temple Dairy. So now that capacity is there in community organisations. So I think that's a strong enough message that, as you say, if communities want 100% ownership, they can have it. And I certainly look. We are not there to tell communities how to do their business. What we're there to tell them is advise them what is the best they can get from this project. I think that the structures in place that, and I know I'm repeating myself here, but we deal with Orla at the moment. I mean, there isn't. I pick up the phone to Orla, she answers straight away. Orla, I've got a problem, she answers straight away, right? If Orla can't answer, she goes to you, Mel, we got an answer straight away. And without that help at the beginning, now we probably would be more difficult. But I think don't be, by someone coming to your table saying, we'll do all this for you, don't be in any way don't be afraid to say no, and don't be afraid to say why, and don't be afraid to say, what are you getting from this? And don't be afraid to say, why are you coming to me in the first place? Because again, this is the issue with community owned, whatever it is, be it it's wind or solar or AD. At the end of the day, if we start allowing this to happen, we dilute the effect of community owned projects in this country. And I suppose I'm not trying to distract here, but I'm trying to say is it can be done. The support's all around you to do it. And I certainly believe that the way SAI particularly are moving from strength to strength in supporting 100% owned community projects, that it is extremely doable.
And don't, and I mean this, don't regret in 5 or 10 years down the road, passing a park, paying out an individual half of your pot that should be going into your projects in your town for your people. You know, don't be afraid of it, because you're not on your own. There is a community of communities here. Okay.
No, I'll move on now to the RESS auction process itself, because in the past, renewable electricity getting out of the grid was through a feed-in tariff. So it's slightly different to this. This is an auction where you bid as low as you can while keeping your project commercially viable.
Yep.
So could you explain just a little bit about that for people?
So one of the things we had to do originally then was a financial model. So what we had to understand was a location in the country. So certain locations in the country would probably be perceived to generate more power than other locations. And the second thing what you'd have is, and the financial modeling is cost to install, and then what you call the management cost to that, and then the cost of finance. And that then determines what per kilowatt you should be getting to make your project financially viable, right? And that may range from 8 cent to 9 cent, 9 plus. It depends on your location. You know, that's awful important. The basis on that, Mel, was what in the RESS auction was. So what happened in the RESS auction was we got notification this auction is happening. The first stage was it was a portal. It was all online. We had to submit all our documentation, connection to grid, our application, planning, etc., etc. And then we had to prove at a stage that we were 100% fitting for this RESS. So we had everything in place as a community project. So once we got across that line, and we had 1 or 2 hurdles to get across on that at the time, we were then at a stage where we could put a bid in. So what happens here is it's what basically it's the best price, and I can understand this and make sense, and it's European model. We will say we want certain amount of money per kilowatt we produce. So we say, for example, we say 9.3 cent. So if we said we want 9.3 cent, it was very simple. We put in, there's a box, what are you going to give us? What do you want per kilowatt of generation, or megawatt in this case? You would say 9.3 cent or 93, whatever it was, 9.3 cent. That was then went into the auction. And then what happened was, what happens in this case is then that the adjudicators or the regulators in this stage then takes all these auction submissions, and what they do is they take the best value for them, and now it's mainly the lowest one, to be honest, right? But they take that price, and subject to them agreeing to your bid, they will then give you that price for 15 years and 15 years plus. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm that makes sense to me. I'm hoping that clarifies that bid process for a lot of people.
Well, one of the things we did do again was we did revert back to Orla at times, and she certainly, if we weren't able to answer that question, she was able, but also through community power at the time, because we, I suppose, a few 4 or 5 heads together, we could talk to each other and ask, what do we do? How do we do it? So certainly there was 2 mechanisms there that we could use to make sure that what we put in was realistic, because if you don't put something in that's realistic, you just won't be able to build it. You won't be able to finance your project. So you have to make sure it's financially viable. And in those costs is the lease cost as well, and much per acre that farmer is getting or the organisation is getting as well.
Yeah, and I suppose that what you just mentioned there is the key part. Once you've got your RESS 1 offer accepted or bid accepted, so you now have a project that has planning, it has a grid connection, and it has a sale price for its electricity, which is now essentially it is a financeable or bankable project.
Yeah.
Which means that there's no reason it shouldn't go ahead now. It will go ahead.
Yeah. So basically, we're in a stage where we would see ourselves as financially, it's a financially viable project now. So what will happen next is we have to clean our site, which is something we have to organise. But what we'll do is that'll go out to tender. So we'll tender that cost out. And probably with the support again at the next level of the SEC support, but also through community power, we'll go out and we'll get a cost to do that project from beginning to end. We already would have spoken to 1 or 2 financiers on this, and look, they're really open to supporting these projects at a low interest rate. And community power are kind of what we're trying to do to support the next generation of communities coming on board, is see, can we generate a financial pot, which make it even easier again for communities to build their solar parks and projects. So, you know, it's like Anthony, if it's commercially viable, they will finance it. Just be wary that there is an ownership thing there, that there's a charge then put on your site. So in case the organization did ever go bankrupt, or your situation that the organization wasn't able to carry the project, they would take rights to that project to see it through. So be very careful to get advice at the stage where you do look at finance, and certainly get advice on the legal structures in protecting both the community and the landowners as part of that scenario occurring.
Okay.
But there's definitely just one thing, Mel, finances, we have found it's there. It's not difficult. It's a guarantee. It's basically, you've got a guaranteed project here by government, you know, which is fantastic, because now what you're doing is, by empowering that community with this guarantee, you're now allowing that money to stay within that community and hopefully generate further projects without having to be cap in hand every time looking back for money.
Yeah, well, you know, to say that the finance is there, the finance is there now because you've got the project to this stage.
Yes.
Because you've built a project that a banker who doesn't care about energy, doesn't care about climate change, just cares about the bottom line, but he can be confident in your business model because you've taken to this point. Yep. So yes, the finance should be available. Well,
we deal. One of the groups we've spoken was the West Frontier Development Commission for up here, the West of Ireland, whereby they would invest in projects for the good of the West of Ireland. They see this as meeting their targets as well, and meeting their I suppose requirement on renewable generation. So there's, you know, those groups exist around the country, and certainly from the point of view, they'd be very supportive as well. But again, we've everything in place. We have our planning, we have our leases, we have our connection to grid. We now have a price per kilowatt. We've gone over that line basically, thankfully. But yeah, that's what we have.
Okay, so we're 40 minutes in. I might just touch on one other aspect which I hadn't included in the points I sent you earlier on, but it's because you went through the process as it was with ECP1, where you had to have planning to go for your grid connection, you had to have grid connection to go for RESS. I might just, I suppose, let people know the slight changes in that process now. The current process is right now, okay, if we work back from the RESS option, the next RESS option is expected in Q3 of next year, so Q3 of 2021. To bid for the RESS option, you do need to have a grid connection offer. The grid connection offer is open right now. They're calling it ECP 2.1, and that's the area. It's open this month for grid applications. To apply for this grid application process, you don't necessarily have to have planning. However, there is a distinct advantage if you do have planning. You will simply be ranked higher in your application, and it'll be easier to get into the batch. So that's just something I want people to be aware of. I'd hope that most of the SECs on the network have seen SAI's expression of interest for support on RESS. If you haven't, contact your mentor immediately and start to fill in that expression of interest. Even if your project isn't ready for a grid application this year, get your expression of interest in, and you'll be allocated some support at a later date, and we'll keep a pipeline of these community projects. As JP said, the community projects are being granted this 1% of the capacity in the RESS options, so it's quite small, and we would hope that there's room to expand on that. So if we can identify and demonstrate that there is a lot more community projects out there, we'd have it. At least we have a little bit of lobbying power on that to perhaps expand on that.
Yeah. One thing just as well, Mel, just follow through. We want to use this revenue to expand on our projects within the town. And I know that from our mentor was always that one of the ideas we have is we want to do district heating, which is where you sell hot water around the town using renewable energy. The interesting part about it is that maybe 3 years ago when we went to the various organizations with this idea, I wouldn't say we were ignored, but certainly we're looked at as being probably 3 or 4 locals with a concept in our head that we could do something, right? In the last month, because of the credibility of what this has brought to us, they're now talking to us and they're now interested in doing the project, right? So now we can show we have a revenue to support that project, but not only that, but as a community, because we've gone through the process of winning this, we're now seen as being credible. Mm-hmm. And I think what, again, what SAI are doing here through the SEC scheme is empowering that credibility. You are seen differently. And it's like what community power is. Community power is doing exactly what SCA are trying to do. They're trying to do the same credible scenario to what you're doing. So I would use this as a starting point, not as a finishing point for us. Our starting point is we want to do the second project, but we also want to do a district heating where we can pipe hot water to social housing, for example. And we can now cover that cost ourselves to do that. So this isn't a finishing point, I think. I would suggest to SECs that this will give you money in your pot for 15 years for you to do what you think is best for your community. And I think, that's going to be, it's a real goal to have. It's a real sweet point to have. And I think it's something that communities should look to in probably proceeding and developing more projects. And not just projects, by the way, this is employment. I mean, this solar park is going to generate 2 or 3 jobs for our town. So this is also employment. Yeah.
Well, look, producing our own energy and buying our own energy in Ireland is as economically effective as exporting that same value, because right now we're importing our energy. So it's definitely, it has an economic benefit. And as you say, when it's local like that and it's community owned, and it will have a very strong local impact. We might just move on to the questions then, JP, unless there's anything else you want to cover.
Yeah, okay? Sure. Just one thing that I want to just say, break this down, break the application down to stages. And if you can break it down to stages, it's so much easier. Stage 1, stage 2, get to stage 2, stage 3. When you break it out and approach from that point of view, this is not a difficult process. Just
okay.
Sorry.
That's fine. We just have a few I suppose statements and questions in from Alan Jackson in Tipperary Energy Agency. He's just letting us know here that Temple Derry, Community Power and Tipperary Energy Agency have joined together to offer all services from concept stage to construction to 100% community-owned projects. So again, that's that partnership in Tipperary that has the Energy Agency, the Community Power, the Temple Derry Wind Farm, the Temple Derry Energy Resources. That's a partnership that's very valuable to communities. It's something we're jealous of in the rest of the country, to be honest.
Well, but actually, Mel, we're part of that. I mean, as community power, in community power, everyone's a part of that. So this is immediately open to everyone. So it's certainly there to help everyone if that needs to be the case. Yeah,
to be honest, from my point of view, and having known them, the biggest weakness of Tipperary Energy Agency is the word Tipperary, because people think they stop at the border. But they don't. They go well beyond that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have another question now. Okay, so it's from Ruth. Did your project set up energy communities co-op in the locality and collaborate with other local energy communities or providers to sell energy back to the grid? I think you've answered that. I think that's the model where you're doing a community generation project and you're working with community power as the seller.
Yeah. So again, just to I suppose close, community power will be a community-owned platform that empowers that community and I mean when I say empower, does the invoicing, does the charging, does the setup, change the accounts over, and allows you to get your own customers to sell your power that generate to your own customers, and at the same time profits made from that stay within your community and generates job creation. So again, it's for me, I would call it a community profit sharing scenario for within the community who sells their own power, and certainly that community power is open to all membership. And I know the guys are like Tipperary are open to speak to any community, and we certainly would support that as well.
Okay. We have a question here around the planning process, and it's simply, did you have to do an environmental impact assessment before?
Yes, with the council, yeah, you do, yeah. We ironically we didn't have to do the second site, our own site. We had a number of things we had to do, which was environmental related reports. What we found actually when we went out to tender first to an organisation to do all these reports, when we approached those guys ourselves, we found that they were about €1,000 cheaper each. So just be careful, who offers you the overall package, because make sure that they detail what the report is and how much that report is costing, and make sure you're getting value for money, because at the end of the day, it's your money that you're paying these guys. Make sure you get your value for money, and don't jump at the first offer on the table to say this can be done or we can do this or do that.
Good advice. Okay, I have another question from Ruth. Can I ask, did your locals that joined the co-op A, buy into electrifying cars and heating systems, installing rooftop PV panels on their houses in terms of, I'm sorry, I'm not sure what the question is.
Well, actually, ironically, Mel, on that we did. We actually got a project for our local school, St. Comas College. We put in a 6 kilowatt system, solar system. We got it funded through the Community Schools Award with under Community Power. So what we did was we've done that, and what we've done with the council as part of a Community Power is to put a charging station within the town. But you see, now we have money coming in, we can now support the building of those projects. So okay. Yes, our idea is to lower carbon footprint within the town to a position whereby we would have a low carbon footprint with the combination of all the renewable generation that is community owned within that town.
Okay. Okay, this is an interesting question. I'm going to read it out. I won't ask you what your bid price was, but can you give us an impression as to how it compares to developer-led projects in RESS? Well, the publication by the department on that showed the average price for community-led as opposed to developer-led. Do you want to elaborate on that at all, JP?
Well, I asked a man one time. What he was getting for a price of his cow and the size of the farm of his land. And when he told me that it was that basically I had to mind my own land, I kind of took a lesson from him to suddenly not say, because it's confidential to the group. I wouldn't say we did massively well, but we did okay. We'll cover our costs. We were very aware that it was a competitive market. But it will return a profit for the organisation. Again, your costs will depend on your feasibility report and what your cost to generate will be. So you may get a report back that could cost you 8 cents, 9 cents. You then have to add a small bit on that to make sure that's where you get your profits from. So again,
yeah,
the farmer's hat here. If I did, there's a 2 or 3 individuals including their own patent and John them that probably shoot me in the morning. So you wouldn't see me on any more webinars, I'm afraid, Mel.
Yeah, no, that's.
It might be no harm, by the way, but there you go.
I think the key point there is, and you had covered it, is that you need to understand how much it's going to cost your project to generate a kilowatt hour.
Yeah, that's what
and that includes everything from the capital, the maintenance, the land leasing, and the cost of finance, and whatever margin then you need for what we call profit, albeit profit going back into the community. And that's your price. I will say that in the document that was released by the department, they provided the average prices, I think, for each category. The average price for the community category was around about 10.5 cents, which compared to sort of 7.5 cents for the other categories. Yeah. To bear that in mind, that's not that they're giving an extra bit to the communities. It's in relation to the scale of the projects and to the difference, the amount of solar that would have been in the community categories. I think
4 or 5 megawatts small, because most developers are going for 20, 30, 40, 90. So those guys are going in for, and their cost of finance is lower, their cost of install is lower. I mean, they can do that.
Yeah, and the difference between wind and solar is something to consider there as well.
Yes.
So someone's asking if you've got a contractor to install the solar park and nail down a price before auction. So do you have to have contracts signed?
No. What we did was we did a financial analysis what it may cost us, but that'll go out to auction. And look, the cost of solar is coming down. So if we were to look at that 6 months ago, I think the cost of solar has even come down since then. So you might find quite happily that by the time you are ready to go, when you go and tender, you might get a much better value for money.
Yeah.
So you just need to have an indication. Just make sure your financial model is good. And I'd nearly go to the point, and you can't do this, but you nearly want to be underwriting these things by certain groups that the reports are real. I would certainly be when I say underwrite, that certainly someone says, well, this is it, they will either guarantee it or within reason support their report they're putting into you. So important that that the information is real, because remember you're basing all your budgeting, all your costs on that report. Again, because it's RESS, under the RESS mentor, these guys have the expertise, thankfully. So, that shouldn't be an issue.
Okay. Another one in relation to the bid process here is within the auction, is there an option to start at a higher price and then reduce it if it's not accepted in the same auction?
No, you go in at one price and that's it.
Okay.
So basically, you have a price. That's unfortunately the game that this is, and it's unfair. It might be unfair in some ways, but that's the way it is. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's it for questions. Paul, is there anything I've missed just while you're there? If you're there.
I am here. There are a few other questions, but I can follow up on them afterwards anyways.
Okay, I may have scanned past some. I'm sorry about that. So we're coming up to the hour mark here. I think. Okay, I've got a question come in by email. Hang on a second. Okay.
The bond.
Okay, I've got a question here by email, and it's to do with the SAI domestic grant scheme. I imagine that's for the solar PV. As to how long that's going to last, I can't answer that right now, and I suppose it's separate to this.
There is a question there, Mel, just regarding, I just see someone come in there, Michael coming in, is there a bond required for the auction? Under community, there isn't a bond needed. Under the other part developer, there is, but for communities, you don't need a bond for the auction.
Okay. Okay, and I've another question here, which is, it relates to the feed-in tariff for domestic PV, which would allow for aggregation of hundreds of systems into a virtual power station and incentivize all to install with the benefits of financial.
Well, this is the funny part as well, Mel, just to let you know, with community power, one of the things that we have decided very early on was that we will take that generation where, you know, from a point of view of that there is rooftop generation or something like that or equivalent, that community power, if it's to benefit the community, we'd look at taking and giving a price for that generation.
So to the virtual power plant project that you're involved in.
Yeah, so the virtual power point, yeah. So certainly keep in mind that, you know, what we're trying to do is empower as much the small user, what we call microgrid user, if you want to call it, as much as the big generation. So look, it all adds up. You know, it's all renewable. It's all to the benefit of the community.
Okay, that's an emerging policy area. I suppose it has been an emerging policy area for years. There is actions or targets in the climate action plan now to provide a microgeneration tariff. Yeah. I think the target is within 2021 to have the tariff, I suppose, established. Yeah. Don't know what form that's going to take, whether it will include domestic or it may just include small commercial. But you know, we'll be running as much information as we can on this with the SEC network as and when it's available.
Yeah. Just a thing there, if anyone's seeing the community power, you can just, you know, go to community power. I think it's .ie. The supports are there if you need the help. But I'd like to thank, I would say this, I'd like to thank the work that Ruth and the guys have done. I know it's been a learning experience, and I think we'll always be learning and trying to adapt. But there were times knowing that help was there at the time. Cormac was there, and now yourselves, Mel and Orla. You know, it's nice having that support there, as it was with the guys in Temple Dairy for us, and we'd hope as a community that we can do the same for other communities. It really is the reason why we were successful. The work that our 7 members did was just, for me, the other guys were phenomenal within our group. You get a good team behind you. You know, it's really a combined approach, and we're extremely thankful for it, to be honest. We're extremely thankful for the help we've got from everyone.
Okay, well, I think that's a good enough note to end things on. So once again, JP, thanks very much for your time today. Sure. We will be publishing this, so you're going to be more famous than you are already. And
can you blank out, Mike? Can you put a yellow face on me or something, Mel? Just, you know.
Paul can do. He's a wizard at those kind of things. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. I am sorry that we couldn't get to all the questions. We will try and run these webinars as we progress, as information becomes more available and clearer, hopefully. So once again, thank you to everyone, and I'm going to close things now. So thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Best of luck with your applications.